Greetings, my name is audience. Where we're from, I hope you're all well. Welcome to the Impact webinar, Japan's Global Act for Hydrogen and Ammonia Value Chains. My name is Kayla, Content Analysis from the Associates, and also your host of today's webinar. Japan, with an ambitious target of supplying 12 million tons of hydrogen annually by 2040, the government has proposed a green transformation-based policy. Around $60 million will be allocated to establishing clean hydrogen and ammonia value chains, both domestically and overseas. The plan involves investment in hydrogen production abroad, such as in Australia and the Middle East, with subsequent transport to Japan for storage and utilization. This webinar will focus on Japan's hydrogen incentive plan and explore collaboration opportunities in the hydrogen industry value chain between Japan and other countries. During this webinar, I encourage all of you to actively engage in our discussions and share your invaluable insights in our Q&A box. I'm also excited to announce that today's virtual session is also the global launch of our physical event, Connecting Green Hydrogen Japan 2023, which will take place on October 17th to 18th in Tokyo. In addition to attending today's webinar, we also look forward to meeting in our physical event, which will bring together the highest level decision makers from across the global hydrogen value chain, include the Malbeni Corporation, Air Products, Tokyo Gas, JERA, CAPCO, JBIC, and Uniper to discuss the latest innovation and feel the future of your business through meaningful connections. To kick off our event, we have the privilege of hearing from Ms. Hiroko Nakamura, Senior Researcher at the Institute of Energy Economies, Japan. In her keynote address, Ms. Nakamura will discuss the crucial role of green hydrogen in decarbonizing Japan's economies. Hi, Ms. Nakamura. The floor is over for you.
Okay, hello, I'm Hiroko Nakamura. Thank you for inviting me today. So I would like to start my presentations. So today I would like to speak about decarbonizing Japan's economy with green hydrogen, its prospects and challenges, but focus more on procurement than application, and Japan's role in building international supply chains for green hydrogen. So next slide, please. So first, to set the scene, for Japan to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, it will need large amounts of clean hydrogen to decarbonize many of its industries. And blue hydrogen and its derivatives are an important solution for decarbonizing our energy sources in the energy transition. Today, it is cheaper than green hydrogen, but risks being affected by volatile market fossil fuel prices, as we have seen. Green hydrogen has a lower carbon footprint and can avoid global market and political pressures on fossil fuels. Low carbon hydrogen can be produced from a wide range of resources, and therefore it can be produced almost anywhere in the world. So resource countries of green hydrogen can be more diversified than that of blue hydrogen, which will also contribute to Japan's energy security. And therefore, green hydrogen is not the only, but an important option for Japan's future clean energy supply. Next slide, please. First, I would like to introduce a study that we conducted on the international green hydrogen supply chain. Next slide, please. In this study, we explored different supply chains, bringing blue hydrogen from Saudi Arabia, green and blue from Australia, green hydrogen from Chile, which is the farthest from Japan, and green hydrogen from the United States. For green hydrogen, we considered both solar and wind power. And as the hydrogen carrier, we considered liquefied hydrogen, methyl cyclohexane, MCH, and ammonia. Next slide, please. So the methodology of our study was we explored the entire hydrogen supply chain. So from hydrogen production we carried the hydrogen to a pipeline, and then it was converted to liquefied hydrogen, MCH or ammonia, and then to the export port at the resource country. And then we assumed shipping. For liquid hydrogen, it would be shipped with liquid hydrogen. And for MCH and ammonia, we used low sulfur fuels. And then in Japan, the receiving port and the reconversion. So next slide, please. So one of our major findings was that the hydrogen import cost. When we, in our assumptions, green hydrogen from Chile have lowest cost when the hydrogen carrier is liquefied hydrogen or MCH. However, when the hydrogen carrier was an ammonia, blue hydrogen produced with natural gas and CCS was the cheapest. So one of our major findings in this study was that the distance from Japan did not greatly affect the total import costs, but it was more that the production costs, or more the cost of the green electricity, the renewables, and the electrolyzers had a larger impact on the total import cost. Next slide, please. And as for the carbon footprint, for hydrogen production, the carbon footprint of green hydrogen is much lower than that of blue hydrogen. However, if the electricity input for hydrogen conversion, transportation, and storage is from the grid, as assumed in this study, hydrogen supply chains from countries with a lower grid CO2 emission factor, such as Chile, will have lower carbon footprint. And among the hydrogen carriers, liquefied hydrogen has the lowest carbon footprint because the shipping fuel is also liquefied hydrogen in our assumptions, and liquefied hydrogen supply chains do not involve reconversion. And for ammonia, of course, if it's used directly without reconversion, the supply chain's total carbon footprint will be lower. So in this study, we found that bringing green hydrogen from the other side of the world could be competitive, and that it would diversify our energy sources and enhance our energy security while decarbonizing our economy at the same time. Next slide, please. And then we took a closer look at the Asian economies, to see more the ASEAN region, and we did a study on greening the ASEAN region with green hydrogen. Next slide, please. And the background and objectives for this study are, first of all, as I mentioned before, low carbon hydrogen can be produced from a wide range of sources, and therefore it can be produced almost anywhere in the world. And the development of a green hydrogen economy in the ASEAN region can contribute to accelerating a region-wide transition to clean and sustainable energy and raising its energy self-sufficiency, and in turn, enhancing the region's energy security. The ASEAN region bears great potential for renewable power, including solar, wind, and hydropower, but it has yet to be harnessed. These resources can be used to produce green hydrogen, but this potential has yet to be sufficiently explored. And given its proximity to Japan, the ASEAN region could also promise to be a future supplier of hydrogen to Japan, depending on its potential. So this is what we explored. We explored the ASEAN region's potential for using locally produced green hydrogen to decarbonize its economy, focusing on its application in hard-to-abate sectors. And then we saw how much it would remain to export to Japan. Next slide, please. So our scope of our study covered industries and parts of the transport sector in the ASEAN region that are difficult to decarbonize by electrification, or the so-called hard-to-abate sectors. And we did not cover power generation because we assumed that renewables should first be deployed to decarbonize the power generation sector. And so we focused on green hydrogen produced by electrolysis using renewable power, such as solar, wind, hydro, thermal, and biomass. And so the methodology of this study, to put it very simply, we identified potential hydrogen demand and supply. So for hydrogen demand in the industry sector, we identified high temperature heat demand over 400 degrees for each ASEAN country by industry. So this would be like most of the iron, steel, or cement industries. And potential hydrogen demand in transport, for that, we identified the final energy demand for each ASEAN country by mode of transport. So we included heavy-duty vehicles, which we assumed would be replaced by fuel cell vehicles, but not passenger vehicles, although light-duty vehicles, as we assumed that they would be replaced by battery electric vehicles. And we included all air, maritime, and rail transport. And for the potential hydrogen supply, given that increasing renewable power should be prioritized in the ASEAN region, we assume that renewable power generation would be primarily used to replace fossil fuel-fired thermal power generation, after which the remaining renewable power could be used to produce hydrogen. Next slide, please. So our major findings for this study is, as you can see, the brown bars, the dark brown bars are the hydrogen demand potential in industry, and the lighter brown is for transport, and the green bars are the green hydrogen production potential. So it has a range. We explored the pessimistic scenario and an optimistic scenario, so it goes from dark to light. And in all countries, except Malaysia, as well as Brunei Darussalam and Singapore, where both supply and demand will be limited, potential supply exceeded demand. And Myanmar and Thailand, you can see, have an outstanding amount of potential surplus supply. The ASEAN region bears the potential to supply 3 times the potential hydrogen demand in 2050, in the very optimistic scenario. Next slide, please. And so we also looked at the sufficiency of potential green hydrogen supply in 2050. So the green bars show that there will be sufficient potential green hydrogen supply. And as you can see, Myanmar, Laos, PDR, and Cambodia will have sufficient hydrogen supply to cover domestic demand. While in Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia, they may have a shortage of domestic supply when the physical potential is not fully harnessed. But with 54 to 843 million tons of oil equivalent of surplus supply, as you can see in the green bar, there is an ample potential supply of green hydrogen across the entire ASEAN region to cover regional hydrogen demand. So, interregional trade of green hydrogen could offer a solution to the region-wide decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors using local resources. And low-income economies, such as Myanmar, Laos, PDR, and Cambodia, may also have the opportunity to become the region's energy supplier. Next slide, please. So now we go into the implications of the study. Next slide, please. So there are policy challenges to developing the full renewable energy potential. Although the ASEAN region in our study proved to have a lot of potential to produce green hydrogen and even surplus, the power development plans and renewable power targets currently installed fall substantially short of their renewable energy potential. So as you can see in the table, we've raised the examples for Indonesia, Myanmar, Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand. They're like one-digit smaller the renewable targets against the potential supply in the scenarios. And many policy challenges remain in developing renewable energy. So these include lack of financial support and channels, lack of experience, or insufficient coordination among government agencies, limited infrastructure. Next slide, please. But it's very important to further promote renewable energy deployment to fully harness the renewable sources that the ASEAN region has. And renewable power should primarily be fully harnessed to decarbonize sectors whose carbon footprint should be lowered by using the renewable power directly. And for green hydrogen to also become a realistic and optimal solution for decarbonizing the economy, the renewable power used in its production should be available in surplus to that needed for more efficient uses, so using it directly. And investments should first be targeted at renewable power projects. So it is essential that policies are secured for the massive deployment of renewable energy in each country. And these could include abolishing fossil fuel subsidies and grid enhancements to integrate more variable renewable energy. Next slide, please. So, and as I mentioned earlier, building an intra-regional green hydrogen supply chain could be another solution. The ASEAN region will have 54 to 843 million tons of oil equivalent of green hydrogen, which is equivalent to 20 to 300 million tons of hydrogen in our assumptions. So if we can harness this, areas with high hydrogen demand are not always located close to potential production hubs. And by establishing an intra-regional supply chain and distribution network, all ASEAN region countries can gain access to green hydrogen. And the regional use of regionally produced green hydrogen can help enhance regional energy security as well. Regional agreements will be essential to overcome many challenges, including the selection of the hydrogen carrier, or the selection of the green hydrogen production site or mode of distribution. So whether you're going to choose the international transmission lines to transmit power, or if you're going to use pipelines to transport the hydrogen. Infrastructure, and maybe a regional certification scheme for hydrogen that is consistent across borders. And Japan can play a role in facilitating these regional agreements. Next slide, please. And so what are Japan's other roles in promoting green hydrogen development in the ASEAN region? This is very important for Japan because the ASEAN region bears the potential to become a major supplier of green hydrogen for Japan. The proximity of the region to Japan will be an advantage in diversifying energy imports and enhancing energy security. So as I mentioned earlier, 20 to 300 million tons of hydrogen could be produced in ASEAN, and that compares to the Japan's targets for 2030 and 2050. And increased investment and government support in the earlier phases of the supply chain, including power generation and hydrogen production, are important. And this will accelerate the decarbonization of the power sector in the ASEAN region and increase access for Japanese actors to renewables for green hydrogen production. And players may also be able to enjoy first mover advantage in establishing the business environment for green hydrogen. Next slide, please. So I think this is my last slide. Under the cooperation frameworks launched for supporting ASEAN countries' energy transition, Japan can support the designing of aggressive but feasible decarbonization policies with consideration of region-specific circumstances and needs. These would include technological and financial support, sharing experiences, conducting in-depth studies, and using these studies to offer support in formulating master plans and enhancing stakeholder dialogue. Slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. And these are the two studies that we recently published on the hydrogen supply chain. If for further insight, please visit our website. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Nakamura. Thank you for your insightful presentation, and your perspective were truly enlightening. And we have also collected some questions from our audience. If I may, there are two questions in the top of our minds. The first question for you, as you said, like Australia, Chile, and Singapore, which route is the most important for import hydrogen route for you, from your perspective?
Thank you for the question. Well, there's no priority. It's, I think, all countries or all regions are important, because the idea is to diversify our energy supply. Chile is, I think, has a special position because we don't import energy from Chile at the moment. So this would be like a newcomer, and that would expand our energy supply and enhance our energy security.
Okay, and the second question is, are there any specific industries in Japan that are expected to play a major role in driving the demand for green hydrogen?
Yes, I think, of course, the power sector would come in first with co-firing, and then maybe 100% firing of hydrogen and ammonia. They would be the first off-takers, and I think our other presenters can talk more about that. And also the high temperature heat users like iron and steel could be a potential off-takers too.
Yeah, Ms. Nakamura, thank you so much for your kind address and your insightful answers. And following Ms. Nakamura, we will hear from Ms. Sidhartha Basu, Strategy Office and JERA, who will share valuable insights and the lessons learned from JERA's hydrogen and ammonia value chain efforts. Ms. Sidhartha?
Thank you very much.
Right now. Yeah.
Thank you. And please let me know if you're able to see my screen now.
Haven't. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. And my name is Sidhartha Basu. I currently serve as the strategy officer for JERA Asia. I'm based in Singapore. And it's my pleasure to join you here today. And thank you for this opportunity. So let me start off by just introducing JERA and providing some background on our company. So JERA is Japan's largest power generation company and responsible for producing approximately 30% or more of the country's electricity. And the company's activities span the entire energy supply chain. So across not only handling of upstream fuel, transportation, trading, operations of LNG, receiving terminals, power generation, and city gas sales as well, and doing this across over 16 countries and areas around the world. When we look at our domestic and overseas operations, JERA has a power generation capacity of roughly 80 gigawatts, and is also one of the largest, if not the largest buyer of LNG globally at around 37 million tons per annum. Now, another way to look at this, if we say in Japan, where as I mentioned, we supply 30% plus of total electricity demand, and LNG, of course, being one of the main ones, clearly JERA plays a very important role in the energy security and the provision of a stable supply of electricity in Japan. And we don't take this role lightly. So this is, we recognize the importance we play not only to the Japanese market, but also in the surrounding region as well. Now, if you look more broadly at our overseas businesses, we're invested across thermal power generation, renewable projects, natural gas liquefaction projects as well. And our company is very focused and intends to continue to contribute to the global stable supply of electricity and energy around the world, leveraging extensive O&M knowledge that we've gained through our long-term operations in Japan, and also our ongoing operations in other countries and with other partners and platform companies. So we take the view that through this global footprint, right, we'll be able to harness the expertise and experience that we have to promote basically like a two-way technology exchange and horizontal deployment of best practices to actually ensure the level of stability and growth opportunities that we want to take advantage of. And this, I think, is also particularly interesting when we look at how we look to expand in the renewable sector as well, where we have particular focus and a lot of recent activity as well in the offshore wind sector, and an area that we're trying to grow and expand further. Next, let me briefly touch on the topic of carbon neutrality. So if you look at the general breakdown of the CO2 emissions by sector in Japan, power generation is roughly 40% of this. And as even mentioned by our previous speaker, power generation is clearly going to be an area of significant focus when we look at how Japan can have material impact on emissions reductions. So, recognizing this and also clearly JERA's leading role in the power generation sector, we of course take it upon ourselves that we must lead the way in pushing forward in this energy transition and towards a decarbonized society. Looking at the situation for the energy industry as a whole in Japan, you can see that over the long term, renewables will clearly need to scale up considerably. However, renewables alone cannot manage to decarbonize the power sector. And while it's challenging to shift away from the fossil fuels, this is also where technologies such as hydrogen, ammonia, carbon capture, etc., can really further support this transition. So if we consider the most recent energy policy in Japan, hydrogen ammonia generation in 2030 will be roughly 1% of total power generation. And based on the green growth strategy by the Japanese government, hydrogen and ammonia can grow to 10% as one of the cases in the generation portfolio by 2050 in an effort to achieve carbon neutrality in Japan. Now, if we take a step back and look at the situation sort of more broadly in the region, there are some estimates that power demand will be roughly twice of what we're experiencing today, if not more. And of course, the challenge is that we want to achieve the dual goals of not only sustainable economic growth, right, but at the same time, support and achieve decarbonization. So if we now add to the complexity of this situation the fact that each country is going to face its own challenges due to its infrastructure, natural resources, and economic situation, clearly these are two goals that are basically going to be divergent. And to achieve the low carbon decarbonized society, of course, we believe that renewable energy must be introduced to and scaled to the extent possible under constraints of geographical considerations, transmission lines, and other natural factors. But in parallel, what we need to do is look at how to scale up these other decarbonization technologies. So lastly on this point, I just want to mention how back in 2021, late 2021, the IEEJ released a report on the role of these low carbon fuels in the clean energy transition of the power sector. And it was clearly pointed out that the usage of these fuels such as hydrogen and ammonia will provide a very interesting and attractive opportunity for decarbonizing the sector, while at the same time allowing for the promotion and the continuation of energy security and electricity security. So what we believe is that as countries continue their options for their own energy transitions, not only Japan, but also in the region, that hydrogen and ammonia will play a key role in this, and they can also be an interesting source of economic growth along this value chain. So now specifically talking about JERA's, own roadmap and its path. Back in October 2020, we had announced our zero CO2 emissions by 2050 roadmap, in which we take on the challenge of achieving zero CO2 emissions across our operations by 2050. And I think the key parts of this is the promotion of renewable energy development, complemented by thermal power generation that's capable of generating electricity regardless of natural conditions, right? And I think what we want really to clarify is that we want to be able to promote and introduce and scale the adoption of CO2 free thermal power generation, so utilizing hydrogen and ammonia. And so what we see is three parts here. One is recognizing that complementarity between renewables and zero CO2 thermal power generation. Secondly, how we will work to establish suitable roadmaps for this decarbonization across the region and where we're operating, and that we also look at making this a smart transition that adopts the technologies that are available as soon as possible or as soon as technically feasible. Now, specifically on the topics of hydrogen and ammonia, now, of course, recognizing that hydrogen doesn't emit CO2 during combustion, it can clearly be a suitable complement for co-firing with natural gas. And on the other hand, ammonia being produced from the hydrogen and nitrogen as an effective carrier of hydrogen, it is going to be a suitable option for co-firing with coal. And of course, there will be certain technical considerations with regards to the NOx emissions and also combustion speeds that must be accounted for. But these are things that we don't see as insurmountable. And in the short term, we're looking at not only the co-firing options, but as well as the options for direct firing for them, so that we can see how these will together help decarbonize existing assets and also provide an interesting pathway for future power generation. So, as mentioned, it's something that we feel very strongly that it's going to require a portfolio of solutions, right, to balance across these technologies. And this is going to be a very clear and important role for leveraging clean or zero emissions thermal power. And the fact that these will balance each other. And the realities of this energy transition will be very different across different regions. So for example, if we simply look at even Southeast Asia, it's a very different energy transition story and usage potential with hydrogen or ammonia than when you look at the US or Europe, especially when you consider factors such as the economic growth expectation, existing infrastructure, transmission lines, and also the existing natural resources. So all of these in combination must be accounted for when seeing how these fuels can actually be leveraged and support the energy transition. Here is just an example of the results of one study we had done in terms of a carbon neutral roadmap for the power sector in Indonesia. And what we see is in one scenario where solar and wind can be expanded to cover at least 30% of power generation, which is fantastic, but it is not going to be sufficient alone to meet the increases in power demand. So there we see hydrogen and ammonia and even CCS scaling up as well to play an important role here. And so this type of exercise is being pursued not only as what we did in Indonesia, but to see how we can support this in other countries as well. As a mission, JERA says that we want to scale up our clean energy platform of renewables and low CO2 thermal power to spark sustainable development in Asia and around the world. Clearly, hydrogen and ammonia we see as being a key part of this, and we're trying to lead the way in this. Now, I think everyone talks about hydrogen clearly, and we as a company are very supportive and optimistic as well as how ammonia, not only as a carrier, but even for direct usage, will be leveraged towards this energy transition. So a couple things to highlight is, first of all, ammonia being one of the the highest level hydrogen energy density across carriers. The second point is that it can be used as hydrogen energy, you could say directly. So it does not necessarily require a dehydrogenation process. And as we look at alternatively clean fuel solutions, this added aspect will actually help to facilitate early adoption and also help from a cost perspective. Additional point is actually that the ammonia production process as it stands today is already very well understood, right? There are multiple licensors of the production technology, and this is taking place around the world, and thus the cost structures as well are very well understood and clear. So when we look at the supply chain, so the transportation, the handling, the storage, these have all been studied and implemented for a long time. And so the ability to scale this industry as well, this is just one less hurdle that will be faced. When we look across the Japanese companies as well, I think we see Japan is really leading the way in developing the technology for direct combustion of ammonia. And we're looking, as a broader extension and working with partners to see how this can also spread into other countries to be leveraged to their decarbonization. Now, one thing I mentioned before and that you may know is that ammonia firing has a challenge of the NOx emissions or generation. And so one of the achievements of a study we did with IEEJ was around coal and ammonia co-firing is that there's a couple aspects to take into account when it comes to the co-firing and NOx is that, first of all, if ammonia can be injected directly into the flame of the coal, NOx generation can be suppressed, right? And then the second point is actually that the NOx generation behavior, when you look at 20% co-firing, is actually very similar to what you experience when you have 100% coal-fired conditions. So basically the takeaway is that if we can actually effectively spread out the 20% ammonia into coal more effectively, we can control the NOx generation more easily, while at the same time enjoying those benefits of 20% emission reduction. So one key step that we're taking in this is to support the demonstration for ammonia co-fired power generation. And this is at our Ekinan thermal power station in the Aichi prefecture in Japan. And to do this, along with our partner IHI, we've been looking at actually shortening the installation period to move forward the date of the demonstration. So we've already done, commenced the construction of ammonia tanks, and as well as a lot of the facilities. So if you look at now the overall timeline, we'll be able to proceed not only with the co-firing and scaling this up to not only 20%, but up to 50% co-firing, and subsequently to be able to expand further even to 100% ammonia usage, while also developing on the hydrogen side. So we see that it's going to be basically a scaled or stepwise progression as the technology is further tested, refined, and then scaled up to larger scale power generation. We're working under the Green Innovation Fund programs as well, the Japanese government, to actually look at doing feasibility studies for hydrogen co-firing, natural gas plant. And one thing to point out here is that while it's known that you can do 5 to 10% by volume co-firing with hydrogen and natural gas, we're looking at seeing how to scale this up further with modification or even if there's new constructions that's required. And we're doing this, for example, in the US with our Linden power plant that's owned by JERA Americas, with a study that they're actually looking at with off-gas, right, from a refinery, including hydrogen, that's then co-fired with natural gas to reduce the CO2 already at around 10%. Now, of course, related to hydrogen and ammonia as a clean fuel, there still will be challenges, right? So building out this fuel supply chain, and while we have the knowledge and expertise for how we've operated on natural gas side, we think that we're able to now replicate those learnings and build on our capabilities to expand and build out the clean fuel supply chain for ammonia and hydrogen, right? So as mentioned previously, ammonia is a very attractive option as a hydrogen vector. for the transportation, storage, and also usage, not only in power generation, as mentioned in the previous by the previous speaker, but other sectors as well. And we think that this can provide a nice glide path, not only starting with power generation, but then just as these supply chains are built out to support other industries as well. Now, with regards to clean fuel, there's still going to be challenges, because while it's easy to show that supply chain on a page, of course, the volumes that are going to be required to support power generation alone will be quite significant. I'll give the example that while 20% co-firing at our 1 gigawatt plant is going to use about 500,000 tons of ammonia per year, so 500,000 tons of ammonia per year, which is relatively big compared to the current market in Japan that's traded at roughly 1 million tons per year. So clearly, this is going to require a massive scale up of the supply chains to be able to accommodate the expected fuel ammonia demand. And so this is where we're working with partners to see how we can leverage the expertise of these players to also build this up together. One example, I think, while we started the bidding process, is this helped to send the signal to the market that actually there is a clear offtake. And while you see many upstream projects, a key thing to make these viable and bankable and actually to be developed will be that there are the required offtakes. And so this is where we can also play a very important role at shifting the market and trying to make this dream a reality. Briefly touching on the fact of, let's say, carbon intensity, because the whole push ideally is to get to green, and we see it as, let's say, a blue to green story. But there's just a lot of important discussions that are going on right now. What is the right greenhouse gas boundary lines for CO2 emissions to be tracked? And while there's an initial figures, for example, by the Clean Fuel Ammonia Association, starting around 60-70%, this is something that we see will increasingly move up, and it's going to be that sort of glide path from blue to green story. I think this has also been supported by various studies that have been done. So here's one example from a task force by Japanese government and private companies, including JERA, where they studied sort of the economic feasibility and costs across blue ammonia from different regions. Now, take in mind that, that the cost structure we expect, while being similar to ammonia used as fertilizers, there will be additional costs for example, CCS or the storage underground. And these prices, while here the outcomes were anywhere in the 340 to 430 range, we expect these, of course, will continue to shift based on not only ongoing factors, geopolitical, etc., that impact the natural gas prices. But I think, again, this is something that will be a stepping stone as the world moves more towards greener or low carbon, call it low carbon ammonia. So if we take a look now at everything that JERA is trying to do, right? Since we had announced our zero emissions plan in 2050 and started, to build out a supply chain for ammonia and hydrogen, in addition to our efforts at Equinon and the ammonia tender, which I mentioned, what we see is that there's going to be a lot of areas for technology development and power sector development, even here in Asia, and to facilitate carbon neutral goals of countries where their gas and coal power plants may be relatively new and are expected to continue to supply power for the foreseeable future, at least, as they try and continue their economic growth. So, we are taking actions through various collaborations with not only Japanese and local companies, with technology players, ranging from upstream to downstream, to actually see how we can try and not only bring the costs down, but build this end-to-end story. Now, a couple examples here that we're working with even existing platform companies that we have. So, for example, we're invested with the Summit in Bangladesh. There's the efforts in Indonesia that I mentioned, where we did the power sector study. And we're also roughly a 1/3 owner in Aboitiz Power in the Philippines, where we're continuing to discuss as well with them how we can expand clean power and renewable energy as well. So I think through these positions, we feel that we can take an interesting and front seat role in supporting each of their energy transitions, but also promoting ways to introduce hydrogen and ammonia into the discussions for their decarbonization plans. And we very much would like to continue to expand on this, because this can be an important piece of the puzzle as the region and Japan as well, of course, work towards zero emissions. So that basically concludes the presentation. Of course, happy to answer some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sid. Thank you for sharing. I want to ask, does your camera work now?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm having issues with my camera. Apologies.
Okay. I have some questions from our audience, if I may, to pick some of questions for you to answer. The first question is, what long-term strategy is JERA implementing to ensure a secure and reliable supply of green hydrogen in response to the increasing demand?
Sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question?
Okay, I can say it again. What long-term strategies is JERA implementing to ensure a secure and reliable supply of green hydrogen in response to the increasing demand?
Oh, yeah. So I think I touched on it in the presentation, but um, we see that this is going to require, let's say, a blue to green type story. And what we're doing is investing in a portfolio of options, right? We're not only looking at not only the supply itself, but also even in the different regions where we're working to see what are the best ways to scale up, right? When it comes to technology developments on whether it's storage, the handling, because it's, again, the volumes that are required for this are quite significant. So when we look at purely the upstream side, there are some press release announcements even within the last half year about how we will be sourcing the required supplies for our Ekinon tender. And at the same time, we're looking at other collaborations and direct investments into upstream supply, both for call it blue ammonia, but as well for green ammonia as well. That way we can, let's say, mirror the approach taken from how we're participating in the gas sector or natural gas and LNG, to have a portfolio of options that we can draw upon for a stable supply.
Yeah, thank you. And the second question for you is, what specific measures and plans does JERA have in place to tackle the challenges related to hydrogen importation, storage, transportation, and infrastructure development in Japan?
Sure. So I think the main activity which I described was what we're doing with the Ekinon plant, and I think this is call it this would be just a key step, not only for JERA for Japan, but even for other countries to see actually how this works end to end. We had announced earlier this year as well how we will be working in Thailand to do a similar sub project with the BLCP thermal power station in Matteo. So that's also going to be pursuing roughly a 20% co-firing activity, which will follow suit. So again, there's the upstream part. So where do we source the ammonia? How do we actually transport and bring it in? The development of suitable storage facilities, right? And then of course the usage in power generation. And so for that, through these initial demonstrations, that also build greater confidence in how this can be a viable solution for decarbonizing, and that it actually allays any concerns when it comes to safety and also the viability.
Thank you for your answering. And actually, we still have questions from our audience in the chat box from Dream Madam, but due to the time limitation, so we hope you are willing to answer these questions in the Q&A box.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And next on our agenda is Mr. Phil Richardson, General Manager of New Energy Projects, Growth and Future Energy and Stanwell. Mr. Richardson will explore the exciting possibilities of forging a bilateral partnership between Japan and Australia for renewable hydrogen exports. Mr. Phil, the floor is open for you right now.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to discussing with you the work that we're doing with our consortium in developing a green hydrogen supply chain. So hopefully you can all see my screen okay.
Yeah,
So,
we can see your screen.
Excellent. Firstly, I just wanted to talk a bit about who Stanwell is. So we are a Queensland government-owned corporation. We're 100% owned by the Queensland government, which is a state in Australia. And our business is in power generation and also in retailing of electricity to large commercial and industrial customers throughout the eastern part of Australia. Our traditional business is in thermal power generation, but we are rapidly transitioning at the moment to renewable energy. And so as part of that, the Queensland government has a target of achieving 70% renewable energy by 2032 and then 80% by 2035. So by 2035, Queensland is expected to not have any regular reliance on coal-fired generation. So to support the transition and of our business, we are developing a pipeline of projects around Queensland. So this slide shows the projects that we are developing. You can see that they're primarily based around the southern and central parts of Queensland. And the reason for that is that that's where our existing power stations are based. And also these regions have high quality wind and solar resources that can be exploited. So you can see we have a focus at the moment primarily on wind power, and we have a number of projects that we have secured through both power purchase agreements and also through equity deals. So over 2,000 megawatts of wind secured to date, plus 400 megawatts of solar, 300 megawatts of battery storage. So those are lithium-ion batteries connected to our existing, at the connection points of our existing sites, and also 2,500 megawatts of electrolysis planned as well, which is the Central Queensland Hydrogen Project that I'll be talking to you about today. So a little bit about the CQH2 project, which is the Central Queensland Hydrogen Project, and what we are trying to achieve in this project. Stanwell is looking to diversify our business. So as I mentioned, we are developing an extensive portfolio of renewables. And as part of that, we're looking at also a number of different industries that we can diversify into. Green hydrogen is a significant opportunity for us to diversify our revenue streams and also to help our existing workforces and communities to transition to the new economy. So we're looking to build our participation through this CQH2 project. We're also looking to achieve a pathway to net zero carbon emissions, and that's both for domestic and also for overseas industries. We know that a number of industries can be electrified using renewable energy, but there's also some industries that are hard to decarbonize. And so particularly the processes that involve high temperatures, for example, where hydrogen could play a significant role. So we're looking to supply green hydrogen into those domestic industries to support that decarbonisation. But also we're looking to support partner countries such as Japan in helping them achieve zero carbon by 2050. And we've already heard a bit about Japan's targets and the work that's happening among Japanese companies. We're also looking to develop Central Queensland as a renewable hydrogen hub, and it has many advantages that we can use for that, and we'll talk about that. We think that the region and the industry can produce high quality jobs, and so we are looking to support that. We also want to create local manufacturing opportunities for the region by maximising the opportunities for different parts of the hydrogen supply chain and equipment to be manufactured locally. We're looking to develop an integrated supply chain between Central Queensland and Asia, building on the successful history that we have in exporting energy resources to Japan and other parts of Asia. Finally, we understand how important it is for us to achieve the most cost-effective renewable hydrogen supply that we can. and meet the hydrogen pricing set by our off-takers. We see that there are 5 key foundations for creating a viable large-scale renewable hydrogen supply chain. And so I want to focus my presentation today on each of those 5 key success factors. Firstly, the right location. We know that green hydrogen requires a lot of renewable energy, but it also requires export points and land. And we think that that's something we have in Central Queensland. So I'll talk about that today. We also think that partnerships and joining together in a high quality consortium is a really strong success factor. And so I'll describe a bit more about our consortium and the work that we're doing together with our partner companies. Hydrogen offtake, that is the key to unlocking a successful project. And I'll talk a little bit about our potential offtake partners that we have in our consortium. Renewable energy supply, that is critical for producing green hydrogen. And I'll talk a bit about how we're looking to source the renewable energy for our project. And finally, regional, community and government partnerships. We know we can't succeed without these partnerships in place. And so I'll talk a little bit about the work we're doing as a project to secure those partnerships. Last week, we had a very exciting announcement for the CQH2 project. On Friday, the 26th of May, the consortium partners signed a FEED participation agreement. So this is an agreement that will govern the front-end engineering design process for our project. So this is a photo from the signing ceremony on Friday, where all 5 partner companies came together and we signed the participation agreement and celebrated together that significant milestone for the project. The front-end engineering design and the investment into this FEED study represents the largest investment in an Australian renewable hydrogen project of its kind to date. So we're talking here about a large-scale green hydrogen export project. This is the largest investment into a project of that kind in Australia to date, certainly that we're aware of. So the total commitment to FEED is 117 million Australian dollars. The breakdown of that is that we have 82 million being contributed from consortium members, 20 million from the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, which is an Australian government body, and $15 million from the Queensland government through the Queensland Renewable Energy and Hydrogen Jobs Fund. As I said, we've signed that participation agreement last week. And so this week and today was the official start, or yesterday was the official start of our FEED study. We're aiming to complete the FEED in around 12 months and then move the project close to a final investment decision, which is planned for late 2024. And the commercial operations are planned to commence from 2028 for the first phase of the project. And on this slide, you can see the 5 consortium members that we're partnering with, as well as the agencies from the Queensland and Australian government that are supporting this project. We believe that the Central Queensland Hydrogen Project is one of the most prospective projects in the world. And that's been backed up by a Deloitte report last year, where this CQH2 project was ranked in the top 10 projects that are currently in the pre-FID stage. So I'd like to talk about the key success factors that I mentioned on the previous slide, the first being the right location. So you can see here a map of Australia and of Queensland in the gold. The CQH2 project is located near the city of Gladstone in central Queensland. And the reason why this is a great location is because we have access to the Gladstone port, which is one of the largest multi-commodity ports in the Southern Hemisphere. It has significant expansion capacity and the ability to export a range of different hydrogen carriers and vectors. And it's also located in a state development area. So this is an area of land that's been owned by the Queensland government and is set aside for industrial development. We've secured land within the state development area, and it makes the approvals pathway and the development pathway for the project very secure. There's also very large amounts of land in that area, so we have sufficient land for not just our initial phase of our project, but potential expansion capacity as well. We're also close to the key hydrogen markets that we're looking to target. So we're close to the Japanese market, which is the key focus for today. We're also close to Singapore. We're also, from a domestic perspective, there's a number of industries in the local area that can use hydrogen as well. So the one example of that is the ammonia industry, which currently uses ammonia produced through steam methane reforming. And we also import ammonia into Gladstone at the moment. This project has the potential to supply into those local markets. High quality renewable resources. Central Queensland has over 300 days per year of sunshine. So it has excellent solar resources, but also has high quality pockets of wind as well. And there's, as you saw on the previous slide, a number of wind projects being developed in Central Queensland. And finally, local regulations and support. Strong support from the local community, local government, state government, and federal government. This slide shows an overview of the supply chain in Gladstone. You can see on the left-hand side in the red triangle is the proposed hydrogen production facility site, which we've secured from the Queensland government. Above that, you can see a proposed site for a solar farm, which is the Aldoga Solar Farm, which is around 350 megawatts worth of solar. The yellow line is the proposed hydrogen gas pipeline route running between the production facility and the Port of Gladstone. At the Port of Gladstone, we're planning to locate a liquefaction facility, and we're also planning to connect the gas pipeline to an ammonia production facility as well. So you can see on this map here that the city of Gladstone is to the south of this site and to the south of the state development area. So there's a high degree of separation between this precinct and the city of Gladstone, which makes it very suitable for this type of development. There's very small and minimal population in this area. And as I said earlier, the land is all zoned for heavy industrial development and is owned by the Queensland government, which makes the planning and approvals process simple. The second key success factor is the high quality consortium. So we've been able to develop this consortium over a number of years, starting in 2020 when we formed a partnership with Iwatani. And we've since completed a feasibility study where we worked together with a number of these consortium parties. And then finally, we've now settled on our consortium for the feed stage. So this group has a unique mix of competitive advantages, which we can harness to enable us to reach the opportunity. So there's a number of potential off-takers within the consortium, but as you can see from this slide, there's expertise across the supply chain, which will be important for delivering the project. So that includes in renewable energy, hydrogen production and transport, liquefaction, ammonia production, which is being developed separately to the consortium, and utilisation of hydrogen as well. So we completed our detailed feasibility study in June 2022 and validated it early this year. And now we've started our feed study. So a little bit about our off-takers that we're working with in our consortium. The first one is our foundational off-taker, which is Kansai Electric Power. Kansai Electric has identified CQH2 as a symbolic project for both Australia and Japan. Kansai is Japan's second largest power generator with almost 30 gigawatts worth of generation capacity. And Kansai plans to use hydrogen at its LNG-fired power stations with a target to import 100,000 tonnes of green hydrogen by 2030. Kansai has announced plans to develop a liquefied hydrogen receiving terminal in Himeji City and is working with Japanese government on funding support for the supply chain. So this is very important for us. It's important for us to have this potential off-taker in the consortium to be able to, the off-taker can understand the project and gain confidence around the supply source. And of course, for the project, it means we have greater certainty around the off-take, which is very critical for actually getting the project bankable. Our second potential off-taker who recently joined the consortium is Keppel Infrastructure. So Keppel has joined CQH2 with a focus on green ammonia for both domestic and export markets. Keppel is a Singaporean-based energy conglomerate, and they're working with Intertech Pivot, who are an Australian ammonia company, on a green ammonia production and export facility in Gladstone. Keppel's also developing hydrogen-ready power generation plant in Singapore and is also working on ammonia fuel turbines as well. Keppel's also participating, looking at participating in a Singapore government process, which has been released, seeking an EOI for green ammonia for both power generation and bunkering. We know that energy costs are a key driver of any green hydrogen project. This slide here shows some feasibility level estimates of the levelized cost of hydrogen. I'll ask you not to focus too much on the absolute numbers. This is very much based on a base case with some conservative assumptions. The key point about this slide is to show that the cost of energy, the cost of electricity, makes up at least half, if not more, of the cost of green hydrogen. So it's a critical input. It's the major feedstock, and it's a major focus for any green hydrogen project. This slide shows a concept around how we plan to use renewable energy in the project. So on this slide, you can see we have two sources of renewable energy: wind energy, which is in the blue bars, solar energy, which is in the gold. And you can see that in the case of Central Queensland, there's a nice complementarity between when the wind is generating and when the solar is generating. So they actually generate at different times of day, which is very helpful. We also have the proposed hydrogen production facility load, which is in the black line. And you can see that the intent is to reduce the load during times when grid energy prices are high and when energy demand is high. So by doing that, by reducing hydrogen load when demand and prices are high, we can actually sell the wind energy into the grid to provide more energy supply at times of high demand and also support the project economics as well. So there's a major co-optimization exercise that the project needs to do in order to make sure that we've got the right mix of solar and wind, and that we're operating the plant in such a way that we can both support the grid and also support the lowest possible cost of green hydrogen. And one further point on that is that, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have a extensive portfolio of renewable energy that's being developed within Central Queensland and beyond there to support this project. And that is looking at a mix of both wind and solar projects. The final area of, well, the final success factor I'd like to touch on is around community and government partnerships. We've done some initial economic modelling through Deloitte Access Economics, looking at the potential economic benefits of the project. So you can see on the left-hand side here, the potential job creation opportunity of the project. We think that there'll be almost 9,000 jobs created in the construction phase of the project at its peak. And there'll also be jobs spread across both Queensland, Central Queensland, and the rest of Queensland. In terms of economic impacts, we're also seeing a significant boost to Central Queensland's gross regional product, significant value from hydrogen exports, and also to the overall Queensland gross state product. So these are significant potential benefits that will flow to the local economy as well as the Queensland economy. But I think the critical thing for us is, how do we actually ensure that local communities can maximise the benefits from this overall economic growth? So we've been on the ground in Gladstone and Central Queensland talking to the community for the last 12 months or longer around the project. What are some of their key concerns and what do they want to achieve out of the project? So I won't go through each of these in detail, but you can see on the left-hand side, these are some of the major concerns that the community has in relation to hydrogen. It's in relation to things like that are not even directly related to hydrogen, such as housing. So how will the community cope with the influx of workers and during the construction phase, and ensure that we don't have a severe boom and bust cycle in the local housing market? There's also concerns about safety of hydrogen, and so education and building community confidence is going to be incredibly important. In terms of water, the community wants to know, where will the water come from in order to supply green hydrogen? There's a number of options that we're looking at there, both in terms of raw water, but also potential sustainable water options such as desalination. The community wants to see benefits flow out of these kinds of projects. And so on the right-hand side, you can see some of the key areas where the community wants to achieve benefit. So these are things that we're going to work on through the process, but I think it's an important consideration for countries like Japan who are looking to invest into production projects in places like Australia to be looking at what are the social license considerations, how do we build community confidence so that the industry can actually scale up successfully. In addition to the CQH2 project, Stanwell is also working on a hydrogen hub within the Gladstone region. And we recently led a funding process with the Australian government where we were able to secure $69.2 million to support the development of a Central Queensland hydrogen hub. The hub will feature a number of different projects, both small-scale domestic projects and also larger-scale export projects like CQH2. Of the 69.2 million, 30 million will come directly to the CQH2 project to focus on common user infrastructure such as gas pipelines and water infrastructure. So hopefully I've been able to explain to you how we see the key aspects of the project coming together, and particularly how we're working with our partners in Japan and Singapore in order to support the development of this new supply chain to help decarbonisation efforts across the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. First, for your kind sharing. This is a very solid presentation, I think, and we have already received some questions from our audience. And the first question for you, instead of fluid state delivery of hydrogen on the sea, are there any solid phase storage technology under consideration?
At this stage, in terms of exporting hydrogen, the two vectors that we're looking at in this project are ammonia and liquefied hydrogen. So certainly aware that there are other technologies under development, such as MCH and solid state as well. But for this project, we're focusing on those two carriers, those two vectors.
Okay, understood. And then the second question for you is, what are some of the key lessons or insights that Stanwell have gained from its experience in the renewable energy sector that could be applied to the development of hydrogen projects?
I think the importance of partnering with credible developers is important with renewable energy because, again, similar to what I've said about the development of hydrogen and the importance of social license and ensuring that communities are not negatively impacted by hydrogen, it's a similar story with renewable energy. When you have large wind farms and solar farms being developed, it's very important to work with credible developers who care about the local communities and can maintain that strong social license to operate. So I think that's one of our key lessons, and one of the things we'll be trying to bring into the hydrogen space is working with those high-quality developers.
Yeah, Mr. Thanks again for your very informative sharing and generous answer to the questions, which is thought-provoking and informative. Thanks. And continue the discourse, we will hear from Mr. Matteo, Head of International Business Development and Duferco in Energia space. Mr. Matteo will focus on the golden rules for sustainable hydrogen production as we work towards building a competitive hydrogen and ammonia value chain. Mr. Matteo, the floor is open for you right now. Welcome. Sorry, Mr. Matteo, we can't hear you. Maybe you should open your camera. Maybe open your voice.
Here I am. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
I will try to. Okay, so my presentation will focus on the basic elements of developing a project. So I will not go too much in depth in the economic data that you know better than me, but based on my experience, because as Duferco Energia, we are developing a hydrogen project that we are studying the solution also for our other group companies. We are steel producers, and we have a shipping company. So we in our industrial group, we have some decarbonization needs. So it's a more a presentation on the basic of a project that is not to be given for granted. So the first one is land and power. We saw also from the some project around that the first thing to look at is to have a independent captive photovoltaic power production. So because it will grant to the project a foreseeable price of electricity and will not compete with the country electrical needs. So that's a key point. All the successful projects I'm looking at, they foresee a captive electrical production. That means that the logistics should be taken into account. So big hydrogen and ammonia projects should be in countries where the land for photovoltaic production is available, both from the extension and for the climatic insulation, climatic conditions. I'm talking with based on my experience. So we are based in Italy, so Italy is like Japan, has not much land to be dedicated for photovoltaic production, and no significant wind resources. So we are obliged to look at other countries to produce the hydrogen and ammonia that we need for our ecological transition. Talking about Middle East, looking at Japan, we can see that the space in Middle East is available. So it can be like Chile that has been previously mentioned. And if we look at the historical data, we see that the most convenient IPP in the world has been signed in Saudi. So we have, and as the other participants told before me, the electrical cost is the one of the major point of the major part of the cost of hydrogen or ammonia. So having the possibility to produce captive electricity at a very low cost, like in Saudi, 1 cent for kilowatt hour, is vital for the project. Then another point that is important to consider, that it's often undervalued, the water. To produce hydrogen, you need 9 liters per kilo of hydrogen. So in countries where the water resource is scarce, another major point is to foresee a captive production of water, because otherwise you will enter in competition with the water for civil and industrial utilization, and it will not be sustainable for the project. So and it will affect also the logistics. So if we look again at Middle East, it's clear that we cannot plan a project for major production of hydrogen without considering desalination of the water to be used in the process. It will not add a significant cost due to the cost of hydrogen. So it will be, I'm not saying negligible, but anyway, sustainable. But it's vital to have it, because otherwise you will probably not be successful in the project. Another major point is the logistics. In Japan, as in Italy, as I said, you will not be able to satisfy all the demand of an advanced industrial country like Japan and Italy inside with the domestic production. So you will necessarily have to import some of the molecules the green molecules that you need. That means that the logistics is vital. So the basic rules are two, basically. The first, the power to so the power to hydrogen, the power to ammonia should be in a very short logistic chain. So you have to produce and to put the molecules in condition to be transported in a convenient way in the short possible logistic chain. And then the transportation, again, you should look at the best way to transport the specific molecule. So if we are looking at hydrogen, probably at present, and I think for the medium term, the best solution is pipeline, is infrastructure. But this will add, if it's not existing, it will add a major cost to the project that will not be sustainable for a private project. Again, looking at Italy, we have already existing pipeline between North Africa, that's our major possible supply of hydrogen, and Italy. So we can use this pipeline designed for methane also for hydrogen. Not the same thing for between Middle East and Japan, or between Australia and Japan. So probably the best way at present, I'm talking the future, nobody will know, but in the medium, the foreseeable future, the best way to transport the green molecules, the best molecules to be transported is ammonia. Ammonia is a high energy density, and it's much easier to be transported than hydrogen. But the second point is you don't want to transform ammonia again in hydrogen. So the best way is to use ammonia as it is. So to have like JERA is doing. So I like very much the project of JERA because it gives to ammonia a new utilization alternative to fertilizer. So it will create a huge potential market for ammonia, and it will give, if you use green ammonia and you reduce the logistic impact in the CO2 emission, you will have a real contribution to CO2 emission reduction. Then, tailored or not tailored, that's something that is often, it seems strange, but it's something that is often forgotten. Each project, and I'm talking about small scale and large scale, is the same, should have in mind a specific users. It's not like the photovoltaic or renewable energy that is easy to be transported. It's all the same. So the utilization is clear. So when you develop a photovoltaic project, the off-taker it's an easy task. Not the same way for hydrogen and ammonia. They are more industrial project than power projects. The problem is that the developers are mostly dedicated to power projects. So they look at ammonia and hydrogen with the same angle than power project, but it's not like that. So successful projects should have in mind a specific offtake, and all the industrial chain of producing hydrogen and ammonia should have the same, should have in mind these kind of utilizations. And just to give you an example, I will give you later two specific examples of that, of a small scale and large scale. Again, looking at my subject, I was I was asked to talk about the cooperation between MENA region and Japan about hydrogen and ammonia. So I just look at the Ministry of Commerce plan to decarbonize the emission in Japan. And as you can see from this simple slide that I just copied and paste, it's the demand that Japan foresee for ammonia and hydrogen is huge. And if I look at again at JERA project, if it will be successful, it will increase. It will push the demand of green molecules in Japan. So it's very interesting. If you look at the potential of production of hydrogen at low cost, hydrogen and ammonia at low cost in Middle East mainly, and the demand that is growing in Japan, I see a very interesting potential match on that. I will conclude my presentation with two small examples that will recap the golden rules that I try to highlight in my presentation. The first one is our own project, a small one, but one of the first in Italy. That's in Sicily, where we have a steel mill, and it's an industrial district. So we have a ENI QH joint venture refinery. We have our own steel mill, and we have also many projects of the Sicily region for sustainable mobility dedicated to hydrogen. So we will build this small system, relatively small. So it's just a 1 mega electrolyzer with 4 mega of photovoltaic captive. In this case, we didn't build a desalination plant because the demand is very low. So it's absolutely sustainable. We're in industrial area where the water is available. So in this case, we didn't need to build the desalination process. And so we will build on our roof the photovoltaic plant. We will build just nearby the electrolyzer and all the BOP, and we will have three potential off-taker in a 5-kilometer radius. We have the refinery, we have our steel mill, we are also a turbo gas peaker that we will not use, but it's there, and we will have a project with the Sicilian region for the supply of hydrogen buses. So if you see, we have this mix of photovoltaic panels, storage, and storage of electricity, storage of hydrogen to make the production of hydrogen possible, even just with solar panels. So we will reach more than 4,000 hours of production a year with solar panel totally dedicated to hydrogen, to our production. The other project is a much larger scale. They are looking at 7.4 gigawatt of peak power of electrolyzer, but the principles are the same. It's in Andalusia, in Spain, and if you look at the map, you will see the area dedicated to photovoltaic production and hydrogen production. The infrastructure that anyway is not a big one, and the off-takers that are all hard-to-abate industries. So the steel maker, ArcelorMittal, and other industrial off-takers. So again, the logistic chain is very short, is using a fixed infrastructure. So the cost of transportation is low, and it's made tailored on the off-takers. So that's my presentation. I'm ready for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Matteo. Thank you so much for your excellent presentation. And also, we have a question for you, and we can't wait to hear your answer to this question. The question for you is, what's key milestones or targets that need to be achieved in order to establish a successful and sustainable mainland to Japan hydrogen and ammonia value chain?
So you mean in which sense of milestones? Well, the main one, if we're looking at cooperation between private corporation in the price of hydrogen. So to be sustainable, I'm looking at the prices in the gas prices in Europe, in Italy in special way. You should look at a cost of hydrogen around €2 per kilo. Otherwise, it won't be sustainable. And to reach this value, again, the main points, more than logistics, if you look at, if you organize an efficient logistic, more than the land, the key point is cost of electricity. Even the capex is all over the same. So the difference is the electricity. That's why the Middle East is interesting, because like Chile or on the other side, because the cost of electricity is very low. You can organize an IPP. You can ask a developer to build for you, just for you, a solar plant off grid. So another good point. If you have a photovoltaic production off grid, it's much easier to declare your hydrogen or ammonia green for the carbon taxes, for example, that we have in Europe. So that's another major point. So to answer your question, the key point, the key milestones is the electricity. Then you have the efficiency of the electrolyzer, the efficiency of the logistic. But to my opinion, the first point is electricity, cost of electricity.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Matteo, for your very detailed and useful answers. Thanks again. And now, shifting our focus, we are honored to have Ms. Karen Fassis, Head of Decarbonization at AP Moller Maersk, share his insights on decarbonization and the urgent need for sustainable solutions in the shipping sector. Ms. Karen, the floor is open for you right now.
Yes, hello everyone. Well, very honored to be here today and introduce everyone to what we have achieved so far at Maersk in terms of decarbonization and what are the challenges and opportunities ahead of us. Should I share my presentation or? Hello? Should I?
Hi, Mr. Karen. Do you need we switch the slides for you?
No, it's fine. I can share. No worries. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, you can share your screen.
All right. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karim. I'm heading decarbonization for Maersk in Greater China area, as well as Japan and Korea.
Sorry, Mr. Karen. Your screen are not in full screen. Not in full.
Okay. Does it work now?
No. So maybe we can switch the slides for you if you need.
That's fine. Please go ahead. All right. So should I just say next slide every time, right? No, okay. So please back to the first one. Yeah. So just a bit of a in terms of like problem statement. So of course everyone knows the challenge of climate change. Global warming is happening, and it's not a matter of understanding if yes or no it will happen. It's just now a matter of reducing its impact. Just last year, we've seen throughout the world effects of the global warming. The shipping industry is responsible for 3% of the global CO2 emission. So of course, as an industry, but also as a company in Maersk, we do have a huge task to decarbonize. Our decarbonization journey started in 2018 when we first launched our ambition of being carbon neutral by 2050. At that point of time, it was not clear how we would achieve these targets. And so we've invested a significant amount of R&D in this topic. And so next slide, please. And so basically there was two ways in terms of ocean decarbonization. There was basically two major levers. One was to increase the operational efficiency, the energy efficiency of our fleets. The other way of decarbonizing was basically to switch to alternative carbon neutral fuels. And basically during 3 years, we've reached several conclusions. One is that if we rely only on energy efficiency measures, no matter if it's network design, execution, more efficient operations, etc., we won't be able to reach the 1.5 degree scenario targets. And so that's why we actually found that through changing our traditional bunker fuel to a carbon neutral fuel, in that case methanol, we would be not only capable of achieving this target, but next slide, please. But actually achieving these targets 10 years earlier. So in 2021, actually 2021 was a very important year where we not only confirmed our ambition, but actually advanced it by a decade. So now our net zero target is to be reached by 2040. And we've also, and that thanks to methanol, we've also announced that our first carbon neutral vessel will be in operation in 2023, and I'm happy to announce that we're on time. So this is happening no later than in July. We'll have our first feeder vessel running on carbon neutral fuel. We've also ordered several larger vessels that will be starting their operation in 2024, 2025. And basically we've also come up with interim targets for 2030. So now the whole roadmap is pretty clear. We are in full execution mode, and it's basically throughout our different business verticals. So of course, ocean, as everyone might understand, it is a very important one, but we also do have targets that are now quantified to be reached by 2030 in terms of terminal decarbonization, air cargo decarbonization as well as warehouses. And all our targets are now fully in line with the 1.5-degree pathway. When we look at ocean itself, basically by 2030, what we need to achieve is 50% CO2 emission reduction by container transported. And basically, depending on the growth, that basically means in terms of absolute terms, a reduction that will go from 35% to 50%. Next slide, please. So yeah, I know that the focus of this forum is on hydrogen and ammonia. Of course, methanol for us right now is the I would say the only option to be proactive right now. The other options for us are, of course, very relevant, very promising, but they are all not ready yet. And one of the major bottleneck for these options to be applied for ocean decarbonization is obviously the engine technology. One of the key milestone that allowed us to take this large step towards methanol as a carbon neutral fuel was the fact that in 2021, the methanol engine technology was fully proven and mature. Of course, there is also other advantages in terms of its low toxicity, easy handling. It is liquid at ambient temperature and pressure. So basically all the transport storage is actually super easy. There's also an existing traditional methanol. So here I'm not talking about the green methanol, but the traditional methanol industry is actually very mature. And so there's a lot of infrastructure that actually can be used. It has a relatively high energy density. I mean, we're still far from the energy density of traditional bunker fuel, but here we're just talking about doubling the size of our tank to have the same propulsion. There is multiple mature production pathways, no matter if it's biomethanol or e-methanol, and of course e-methanol is more related to our topic today because it's derived from green hydrogen. It's basically there's a lot of existing regulation in place, can be used at the future stage also for fuel cell. And whenever second generation ethanol will become not only available but also at acceptable price, we would then be able also to use it as a drop-in fuel in our methanol vessels. And I mean, most importantly, that's also a very in our business. It's super important. It comes at a cost/price that we see as acceptable. Next slide, please. So a few facts about our methanol fleets. So I mentioned that in 2021 we've launched the order of altogether 19 methanol-powered vessels. The first one will be in the water in this year, as mentioned earlier. It's a small vessel, 2,000 plus containers, but by 24, and that's also like the where we will see the big ramp up starting in early next year, where we'll have the first 16K, 17K container vessels being in operation. These are all dual fuel vessels, and here the intention is not to use traditional fuel. It's mostly for the ignition of the engine, and for this you need diesel. In that case, we would be using a very small amount of biodiesel. So in the intention is really to use only carbon neutral fuel, and the intention also is not about retrofitting our existing fleet, is actually to replace our existing capacity. So basically, whenever a vessel is phased out, we will replace it by a carbon neutral fuel. That's also part of the announcement that we made in 2021, is that Maersk will no longer purchase vessels that are not capable of running on carbon neutral fuel. The vessel is also a completely new design. So as mentioned earlier, apart from the alternative fuel, the energy efficiency is also very important. So these are 20% more efficient, more energy efficient vessel. We are evaluating retrofit possibilities, but it's mostly about new builds. One good news is that since now we haven't come across any major obstacles, and we are fully on time with our timeline. Just also like to just to give you an idea of this first ramp up. So this first ramp up will allow us to 24-25. We will be able to abate 2.3 million tons of CO2 per year. It's still very far from our 2030 targets. We will see later what is the gap, but we would have basically reduced our absolute emission by 6.5%. If you remember one of my first slide, we need 35 to 50%, but it's already a first step. The next slide, please. Yeah, so now what are the biggest challenges ahead of us? One, of course, and that's my major focus on a daily basis, is to secure the production, the sourcing, the investments of green methanol throughout the world. This methanol is, as mentioned earlier, is a very mature industry. There is basically 100 million ton of methanol that are being produced globally, but this methanol is for us of no interest. It is most of the time, I mean, in that part of the world, it is coal-based methanol, so black methanol. In some other parts where you have a lot of gas, you would have gas to methanol, blue methanol, but these are not the product we need. What we need is, of course, a carbon neutral methanol. And as we speak, it doesn't exist. Next slide, please. Yeah, just here an illustration of the global capacity, the global production of the product we need. Green methanol is, was in 2021 30,000, so almost nothing compared to the 100 million tons of traditional methanol. What we need for our vessel this year, the small one, is just 10,000, but by the time 24-25, we need basically 25 times the global production in 2021. And that's just for the first wave, the 19 vessels that I mentioned. Another important number, and that's also an official number, an official target that we are pursuing, is to secure 6 million tons. That would be our forecasted demand by 2030. Next slide, please. So from now until 2030, of course, the focus will be on green methanol. Now, what happens beyond from 2030 to 2040 is, of course, hard to say. As I mentioned earlier, one big bottleneck is on the engine technology. So we are, of course, when we think about ammonia, for example, we are monitoring very closely with our engine suppliers. What are the progresses? What is the timeline, etc. What we can expect that in the next decade, ammonia technology will be ready, and so for the next decade, ammonia will be the fuel of choice. But from now until 2030, we're working at full speed on methanol. Next slide, please. And so just to give an indication, and that's only Maersk, the last number that you see here, 20 million ton per year. This is assuming that no other technology gets mature enough, which is, let's face it, it is a possible scenario. In that case, we would need 20 million ton per year of green methanol. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier the fact that for us, we are very, of course, conscious of all the risk of greenwashing, etc., etc. So for us, we are very diligent about the green fuel that we procure. And here, of course, certification is one also of the big issue. We need to certify the feedstock. We need to certify the process. Basically, what we need is, of course, feedstock that are only of biogenic origin. So that's also I would say one of the big constraint, because it's actually now super easy to get captured industrial CO2. But again, industrial capture CO2 is not something we accept for the production of green methanol. To us, that doesn't produce green methanol. We need green CO2 as well as green hydrogen. So green hydrogen is now, I mean, we all know this, that now it's getting mature. It's not pretty mature, but it's getting mature through renewable plus electrolysis. But when it comes to green CO2, we also, so we need to basically, when it comes to finding the right projects, there is a combination of both having access to abundant wind and solar resources, but also to some biogenic point sources, so biomass, waste. Yeah, it has to be. That's also an important point. It has to be only waste and residues. We are, of course, very careful about not having energy crops that are basically replacing food crops. That's very important. Certification. We are hopefully there is now existing scheme that are available. We recognize ISCC as well as RSB as a certification. We also need to quantify the greenhouse gas savings, basically using the traditional bunker fuel as a reference in terms of gram of CO2 per unit of energy per megajoule. And when we look at this GHG saving calculation, we of course look at it on what we call life cycle basis. So basically from well to wake, and not only from tank to wake. The well to tank is also very important. Again, if you're not considering the well to tank, any hydrogen could be used, and so that's very important for us to make sure that when we look at a green fuel and we look at the life cycle from basically the feedstock, the production, all the way to the combustion on board. Next slide, please. Yeah, the second challenge, of course, because we understand that this comes at especially at the beginning, of course, our aspiration as an industry. We work very close with our partners to fill the gap in terms of cost between traditional methanol and green methanol. But now, as we speak, of course, there is still a cost premium. The question is also to understand that there is, even though it is growing, it is still not enough. But in our demand side, in our client side as Maersk, we do see a continued increase in customers that are actually willing to pay a premium. But as I said, we still have 70,000 clients, and it's not all of them that are there yet. So we need to work very close to them. But just to give you an illustration, next slide, please. On that particular point, I really like this study from BCG that basically gives for goods that we all know, a car, a smartphone, a pair of jeans. It basically quantifies the cost of carbon neutrality. So next slide, please. So what we see here, so basically you have like an assumption on what is the price of the car, of the smartphone, of the pair of jeans, and basically and that's not including only green shipping. It's including the whole process, the whole production, all the different scopes basically. The cost increase is still, even though we live in economies where, unfortunately, we are facing inflation. I still believe that these cost increase can be accepted by the very end consumer, given that it's, of course, not greenwashing, and yeah, and it's basically certified. But this kind of price increase, this is definitely something that the end user, the end consumer, can accept. So now, as the whole value chain in the upstream, we need to figure out, okay, what are the bottlenecks? What are the bottlenecks to go from a freely naturally available wind speed, solar radiation, to a product in the hand of a consumer who is willing to pay this kind of premium. Next slide, please. The last but not least, of course, we need to, and that basically yeah, echoes a bit the fact that if we are satisfying the demand of an end user who's actually willing to pay for a premium, we need to be also super diligent in the traceability of the whole value chain. So we need to work closely with each other, and especially with governments. Governments should play a very important role in making sure that this is a level playing field. Next slide, please. The fuels, of course, it's an important part to make sure that we have in the right quantity at the right point of time, in the right color, the right fuel, but it's not enough. There is a whole infrastructure, a whole ecosystem that needs to be built, and of course that's why we are forming new partnerships with the port groups, with governments, to make sure that from the feedstock, from the no matter if it's we're talking about wind, solar, or biomass, we are basically capable of, from a regulatory point of view, from a certification point of view, from an infrastructure point of view, we are capable of going of basically bunkering our vessels, and basically offer a certified green shipping solution to our clients. Next slide, please, and that would be the last slide. Yeah, thanks a lot for your attention. Feel free to contact me, no matter if it's LinkedIn or WeChat. We are, of course, looking for partners, as I said, not only on the fuel supply side, but also on the infrastructure side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Karen, for your kind sharing. I'm sure it's a very solid presentation for our audience. And during your presentation, we also got a question from our audience. The question for you is, are there any specific policy or regulatory changes that Maersk believes are necessary to facilitate the widespread adoption of low carbon technologies in the shipping industry?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There is, of course, and it's not only one. It's a lot of them. But so basically, to put it in simple words, when it comes to regulation in the maritime, global maritime industry, I mean, as far as Maersk is concerned, there is basically two leading regulations. One is the IMO. The IMO is under the United Nations, International Maritime Organization, based in London. And the other one is, of course, the European Union. Why the European Union is so important? Because, again, EU is importing a lot of goods. It's still the largest market, and so in terms of defining the regulation for all these goods that are imported into Europe, it is super relevant authority. These two, I would say, they are working at different speeds. EU is going faster. There is already a few schemes. You might have heard of CBAM, cross-border adjustment mechanism. There is the ETS, etc. So these are already, I mean, not in place, but they are announced and they will be in place starting from next year. IMO, there is one super important forum that will happen in July this year, MEPC 80 for Maritime Environment Protection Council. That's basically one of the council below IMO. And during this council, there are actually critical decisions that will be made. And of course, in Maersk, we are strongly pushing and advising for the most possible advanced measures. Here, basically, there are two main topics that are at stake. One is in which year the whole maritime industry will, I mean, what will be the target year for the industry as a whole to achieve net zero. So I mentioned in my one of my first slide that Maersk, it's already announced, is 2040. But right now, the compromise, and that would be already a very good, so a good outcome, is that in July, and that's actually what we are hoping for, because there won't be anything better, unfortunately. But we hope that at least the industry can have the consensus of announcing 2050 as the net zero target. That's basically for the, let's say, the longer term. Unfortunately, we hear voices that might not happen because of some it's the United Nations, so all the countries are participating, right? And maybe some countries are a bit afraid of committing to such a target. Of course, I won't get into details. The other important measure which is being discussed is what we call the LCA. I also mentioned this in my presentation, the life cycle assessment. That's also super critical, and this we are of course very much hoping that this will go through. Again, it's a matter of credibility for the industry. Us, we will always, I mean, we don't, that's also something I really like about Maersk, is that we are not waiting for these policies to be in place. We are taking the actions, but what we don't want is that because of the wrong regulation, everybody in the outside the industry believes that the green methanol thing or the green fuel thing is greenwashing. And the best way to avoid this is for the IMO to adopt, to confirm that a green fuel can be only green if you look at it on a life cycle basis, including both production and combustion. So from well to wake. Sorry for the long answer. I hope it answers the question.
Many thanks for your generous answer. Yeah, I think it's very provoking. And now we are honored to have Ms. Hitomi Komachi-Hartner and Alan Aubrey, who will discuss Japan's hydrogen subsidies and their profound impact on industry expansion and clean hydrogen innovation. Let's welcome Ms. Hitomi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I've been listening in on very interesting sessions from the other speakers that are clearly at the frontier of this emerging sector. In many of the topics covered, the government subsidy is a big area of interest to investors and funders, as you've heard. And Japan being one of the biggest offtake destinations, there is a lot of interest at the moment on Japan's subsidy scheme coming up. So let me try to share my screen. Are you able to see that?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Great, thank you. You may have read an article on the FT over the weekend titled "The Staggering Cost of a Green Hydrogen Economy." Whilst that article doesn't talk about everything, it does talk about a few very interesting points, I thought. One was that the most compelling case is where direct electrification is not feasible for hydrogen and ammonia, like industrial processes that require chemical reaction. And the other aspect of it, which is interesting, is, there are many ways of calculating what the cost of green hydrogen will look like. But one very sort of simple calculation, just looking at CapEx and not even looking at OpEx and IRR, is a sort of around $62 per megawatt in terms of electrification using hydrogen. And the alternative being gas fired power, being, assuming a reasonable level of gas price at $50 per megawatt. So that's looking like a $12 per megawatt gap in terms of what investors are actually paying for right now, and the actual sort of assumed production cost for green hydrogen. So that $12 per megawatt, that kind of gap is exactly the type of gap that Japan's subsidy scheme is looking to fill. And when we multiply that assumed gap by the 500 million tons per annum that is expected to be the world's demand for hydrogen by 2050, then we're looking at a $4 trillion in subsidies globally. And so, like with many of the topics and factors discussed, we're talking about a very large scale in terms of potential subsidy needs. And Japan's GX Act that was just ratified a couple of weeks ago is committing around $60 billion in subsidies for this purpose. Around 1.5% of the global needs by 2050, but still, this is a significant start. And so we have recently published an article on this, and it'll be on ANO's website and LinkedIn, etc. But we've also, since the onset of the GX draft that was with the Japan's diet since February, we have been discussing this with clients globally. And so I'm hoping to give you today an overview of the scheme, as well as some of the feedback and the most pertinent sort of comments that we have on the scheme to date. So just some background before we get into the details of the scheme. As you know, Japan's focus on hydrogen started a very long time ago. Japan was the first country to establish its national strategy on hydrogen in 2017, and it's always been sort of in Japan's story in its path towards decarbonization, namely to cut carbon emissions by 46% by 2030 as compared to 2013 levels, and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So another milestone in Japan's story on hydrogen was the establishment of NEDO Innovation Fund in 2021, which some of the other speakers also talked about as well. That committed $18 billion in innovation and R&D, and out of which $3 billion was earmarked for hydrogen. So since 2021, when that fund was established, this year definitely marks the biggest milestone on Japan's subsidy story as far as hydrogen and ammonia goes. But it's not just hydrogen and ammonia, but the wider green transformation story, which is what the GX Act is targeting. So in terms of the amount, the government has committed to $150 billion of funding through the issuance of government bonds over the course of the next 10 years. And out of that funding, $60 billion in funding has been earmarked for cleaner hydrogen and ammonia projects. And there are two prongs to the subsidy scheme as shown on the screen. Firstly, a subsidy scheme to support international supply chain projects for hydrogen and ammonia based on the contract for difference scheme. And secondly, what I call the cluster support, which is targeting domestic storage and transport and use, which would be a scheme akin to the NEDO fund that we already have. So a bit more on the GX Act. This act is not just about hydrogen and ammonia, but aims to achieve Japan's decarbonization goals whilst maintaining energy security and stimulating economic growth. And so in addition to the issuance of the bonds that I mentioned, the Act also talks about ways in which those bonds will be repaid. And this is quite significant from market creation perspective. Firstly, the government will charge fossil fuel levies to importers at the point of import in Japan for any fossil fuel resources. And secondly, there will be contribution payments imposed on power generators in Japan for the allocation of emission quotas. So these measures are set to create a carbon pricing market in Japan, which has wider ramifications for any users of fossil fuel, but that also pushes the hydrogen and ammonia economy in a big way. Talking specifically, though, about Japan's CFD scheme and Japan's subsidy for hydrogen and ammonia, I wanted to first of all show this chart to just show how the subsidy schemes under the GX Act will respond to various aspects of hydrogen and ammonia supply chain. So this is showing everything from the upstream to the downstream for both green and blue hydrogen. And you see, upstream renewable electricity production or gas methanation using CCS to transport, so conversion into chemicals in order to make it transportable, and then marine transport and import facilities into Japan, and domestic transport, storage, or use. And so the two prongs of the subsidy scheme that I spoke about, firstly, the supply chain subsidy responds to everything upstream from the upstream renewable electricity production or gas production down to import facilities and reconversion. Now, there is a question around whether or not the scheme will fund, existing technologies like the renewable power itself or the gas itself, but the scheme will definitely is intended to respond to new aspects of it, including electrolyzers and conversion into transport medium and marine transport. And the second prong of the subsidy scheme, being cluster support, will be responding towards the domestic usage. And there, the government has identified 3 large-scale and 2 smaller-scale industrial clusters, trying to fund shared facilities for in order to expand the use of hydrogen and ammonia in Japan. So 2 things to note on this is that, unlike in the case of many hydrogen subsidy schemes that we see around the world, like in the case of IRA in the US or the UK low carbon hydrogen business model, the scheme targets international supply chain projects, and they do not need to be constructed domestically. There is a clear recognition from the government that the criteria that is important is hydrogen and ammonia import for Japan. And another thing to note here is that given the challenges that Japan has being sea-bound and the reliance on hydrogen and ammonia import, the scheme specifically applies to the transport elements of the supply chain, including any conversion for the purpose of transport, like conversion of hydrogen to MCH or ammonia. That process would be captured by the CFD scheme. So talking more specifically about the supply chain subsidy, which is the first prong of the subsidy scheme, the CFD will be made available to suppliers of hydrogen and ammonia. And what does it mean to be a supplier? The policy documents contemplate three types of suppliers. Firstly, a producer of hydrogen and ammonia that directly sells to users. This producer could be in the Middle East or in Latin America or in Australia, where, to take advantage of the cheaper renewable power, for instance. The second type of suppliers is a trader of hydrogen and ammonia that buys and sells to users in Japan. And the last category is captive users who produce hydrogen and ammonia for their own use. The policy documents make clear that the main target of the CFD scheme is the first category of suppliers, being producers of hydrogen and ammonia that sell directly to users in Japan. And this is because the scheme is aimed at scaling the nascent hydrogen and ammonia markets. The policy documents also recognize that there are many other subsidy schemes around the world, and that especially because the Japanese scheme is targeting international projects, there may be subsidy schemes available locally, and there is a no double dipping policy in that the Japanese scheme is intended to respond where other schemes do not respond, including where there's overlap between the NEDO funding and the CFD model. On what is covered, as I mentioned already, both green and blue hydrogen are eligible, and in very limited circumstances, gray hydrogen would also be considered if there is a clear path towards decarbonization. On duration, like the UK model, the scheme runs for 15 years, but it is about 50 years. This is designed to be a long-term scheme to support the bankability and investability of these supply chains, taking into account the lifespan of a large-scale infrastructure or energy project of this nature. A number of you who especially have worked in the offshore wind industry will be familiar with this graph. This is showing how the contract for difference works. The base price, as you see, which is a flat pricing that goes down after a period, is the bid price, which each bidder for the scheme will bid in terms of the estimated cost of producing ammonia or hydrogen at the time of the bid, including capital expenditure, operating costs, and return on investment that's assumed at the time of the bid. And the idea is that the scheme will be granted to successful bidders, taking into account the attractiveness of that bid price to the government, along with various other criteria that I will speak about a bit later. And what the contract for difference is to pay the supply. The government will pay the supplier the difference between the base price and the reference price. The reference price for hydrogen will be natural gas price, and the reference price for ammonia will be the coal price. As you see, the policy documents contemplate the base price dropping down over time. Our read of the policy documents is that this reflects the ability of the authority to review the base price every 5 years based on the actual cost of production that the specific project is exhibiting at the time. Now, granted that cost of production over time, given this is a new technology in many ways, is expected to drop, but this element of the scheme introduces uncertainty which investors and funders would not prefer to have. This graph goes into a bit more detail, which for the purposes of today's session, I won't go into in much detail, but suffice to highlight here that depending on whether the supplier is producing blue or green hydrogen, there may be different outcomes on the amount of subsidy that is paid to the supplier and the restitution due from the supplier. So a common feature of a CFD scheme, as is the case here, is that if the reference price shoots up for some reason and exceeds the base price, then the supplier needs to pay back to the government the difference between the reference price and the base price. So naturally, the suppliers are actually exposed to the reference price risk. And there is a question around how you manage that. And it's a sort of a double question in the case of blue hydrogen or ammonia, because not only the scheme exposes you to the reference price in terms of gas or coal price, but in the case of, for example, blue hydrogen, you're already exposed to the feedstock being gas. So how you, again, manage the gas price risk is of interest to a lot of the investors that we are talking to around the world. So this is a slide that I really wanted to get to for the purpose of this talk. And it summarizes a lot of the comments and points that still need to be worked out on this scheme, which are of interest probably to investors and funders in this room. Firstly, some clarity is required for the reference price being natural gas and coal price. From a very practical perspective, what investors and funders will want to know is exactly which index this reference is going to follow in order to actually model their businesses. The second and a related sort of more philosophical question is whether or not the link between coal and ammonia and the link between natural gas and hydrogen is actually the right ones to make at this stage. Given that many uses of hydrogen and ammonia are out there, and the cogeneration and coal firing aspect of it in terms of the link is noted, but given the many other applications of hydrogen and ammonia, in the long term, we query whether or not this link makes sense. And we also query whether or not it creates the right incentive, although I'll leave that question up to the economists and the financial modelers in the room to comment. Thirdly, any element of uncertainty, as I already sort of mentioned, will deter investors and funders away from this subsidy scheme towards more favorable subsidy schemes globally. And I already talked about the stepping down potentially every 5 years of the base price, but another aspect of this is, definition of low carbon hydrogen and ammonia that would be eligible for the scheme. So Japan is looking at a number of different standards for low carbon hydrogen and ammonia. And unlike the EU, they are obviously open to blue hydrogen and ammonia, looking at like the US approach of well to gate sort of emission, total emission of carbon in the life cycle of ammonia and hydrogen. But they also have left open the possibility of reviewing that standard periodically, for example, every 5 years or so. That, again, introduces uncertainty, and what that might end up doing to the investors is that investors will naturally need to work in to their specs on day one the possible change in law risk and the possible change in regulations risk on standards on low carbon hydrogen and ammonia. And that's going to end up being expensive with the EPC contractors and technology providers. And again, that's going to actually, come back and be fed into the base price that's bid on day one, which the government will end up paying for. And so the ability to open what constitutes low carbon hydrogen or ammonia and this change in law risk should be approached with care by the government. Fourthly, aside from the bid base price, which the potential suppliers will submit to the government, other criteria will still need to be worked out, and details are still not available, but are being closely sort of considered and developed by METI. Broad topics for the requirements include energy security, environment, efficiency, feasibility, and the impact on wider economy. And further details will be welcome for investors and funders as they proceed with a number of feasibility studies and pilot projects globally. Go through the last 2 points quite quickly given time. Fifthly, the scope of what expenditure that can be included for the purpose of the base price for the CapEx and the OpEx will need to be clarified. For example, inclusion of the renewable power upstream, for example. To what extent can you include that into CapEx, especially if the renewable power needs to be built on a captive basis only for the hydrogen and ammonia, then can you include that or not? Those kind of questions still remain. And lastly, albeit also not perfect, the UK approach on hydrogen is to also respond to volume risk. So the risk that given this is a new type of product that will be available in the market, what if the off-takers do not take hydrogen and ammonia? That type of volume risk is something that UK is approaching, and it would be interesting to see whether the Japanese government offers any support in this respect. So these are the type of points coming out of our discussions internally and with our clients globally. And we're always happy to pick up further points with you or brainstorm to see how the scheme is going to work for you and investors in the market. So finally, last two slides, I just wanted to touch base on related developments in the landscape in Japan. First of all, as you may have guessed, because of the inclusion of blue hydrogen and blue ammonia, CCS is a big feature of Japan's strategy as well. And the GX Act actually commits another $30 billion, which is separate from the hydrogen and ammonia subsidy scheme, to develop CCS in and outside of Japan. And again, the definition of low carbon hydrogen and ammonia allows for CCS, albeit the inclusion of CCU is not necessarily fixed for the time being. And then finally, when we're speaking about government funding, it's also important to keep in mind the Japanese government agencies and what they're doing. And in particular, recently, the expansions in the remit of many of the government agencies in order to help support decarbonization and supply chains coming to Japan. And by way of an example, the JBIC Act was amended recently to expand the scope of JBIC financing remit to include projects not necessarily owned by Japanese investors, but completely non-Japanese borrowers, if the project is able to support and strengthen the supply chain back to Japan. Exactly what sectors this expanded remit is to cover is yet to be determined, as it's subject to ministerial decree. But by way of example, if that also covers hydrogen and ammonia, then all of a sudden the scope of investors that could apply for JBIC financing expands significantly. And there are similar sort of expansions in remits that has been passed and are being discussed with respect to institutions like NEXI, JICA, JOGMEC, and others. So this was my very short overview on Japan's hydrogen and ammonia subsidy schemes and related developments in Japan. My article talked about, can this compete with US's IRA? And time will only tell, but it's certainly a start, and we're closely monitoring further progress on this front. So thank you for listening, and I will hand back to Kayla.
Yeah, Ms. Hitomi, thank you very much for presenting such an informative speech. During the presentation, we got a question from our audience. The question for you is, what are some of the potential risks or uncertainties associated with relying on hydrogen subsidies, and how can companies mitigate them?
Sure. There are a few risks. First of all, the scheme is going to be established, as scheduled this year, end of this year, or perhaps into next year. And so all of those details will need to be reviewed when they come out. But assuming that the payment structure is clear, you're effectively taking Japanese government risk, which is as good as any other credible investors out there. So from the credit perspective of the Japanese scheme, it's very solid. And Japan's basically done this many times with solar, with wind. They're doing that with offshore wind. And so there's enough track record for investors to be very attracted to the scheme, as I see it. Some of the risks associated I have discussed are, change in law and change in law risk, particularly around certification of what constitutes clean hydrogen and ammonia. The government might change that, as all of the other governments are, also considering to change over time. I think that needs to be moderated somehow as an investor looking at any project on day one and trying to come up with an estimate cost in order to bid for the scheme. And so those are some of the risks that will need to be considered as Japan finalizes the scheme. And we are in discussions with clients, but also with METI and some of the government agencies to try and make the scheme as workable as possible for the investors.
Yeah, Ms. Kintomi, thanks again for your very informative sharing and the answer to the question. Now, lastly, we will hear from Mr. Tomoaki Ishida, the Managing Executive Officer at Mitsui O.S.K. Lines, who will discuss the opportunities in hydrogen and ammonia transportation with his extensive knowledge and experience in the maritime industry. Ms. Tomo, the floor is open for you right now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can I share my slide? Can you see it? It is shared. Can you see my slide?
Sorry, we can see your screen, but it's not in full screen. Do you need we switch the slides for you?
Okay. You have my own the slide.
Yeah, we have your slides.
Okay. So can you show the slide on behalf of me?
Okay, please wait a moment.
Thank you. So everyone, good afternoon anyway. My name is Tomoaki Ichida. I'm a managing executive officer of Mitsui O.S.K. Lines, and I'm responsible for the All Americas trade. I'm now stationed in the United States, and I'm covering not only existing business, but also all other businesses. I'm afraid I can complete all my presentation because of the limited time. So I will make it in 2 minutes. So today I will give you some core part of my presentation. Please go to the slide number 3. Next one. Yes, here's our mission. So everybody in MOL try to achieve our mission as shown here. Please show slide number 5. Next one. Next one, please. Yes, this is the brief introduction of Mitsui O.S.K. Lines. We established in 1884. So next year is our 140th anniversary. And we run over 100 ships on water right now. And we are one of the largest shipping company in the world. Yes, next slide, please. Next slide, yes. And this is our types of ships. So not like Maersk, we are running various types of the ships. Therefore, we need various measures to make ourselves low carbonization or decarbonization. So it depends on the vessel type how to make a decarbonization. Next slide, please. And recently, we made an announcement of our management plan called Blue Action 2035. So you can see our management plan on our web. So please kindly look at the details in our web. But I will explain some core. Next slide, please. This is overview of our management plan, Blue Action. And environmental strategy is one of the core part of our strategy in the 3 years and towards 2035. And the next slide, please. Yes, in the Blue Action, we also made an announcement of our sustainability plan. It contains our strategy for the environment. To the slide number 13. Please. Yes, go ahead. Yes. So this is our target and pathway to the net zero emission by 2050. So as I mentioned, we are running various type of ships. So we have to take various measures to achieve net zero by 2050. And as you can show on the screen, we will take various measures such as improve our operational efficiency, or using LNG or methanol for low carbonization or decarbonization. And ammonia and hydrogen is probably main method to make our self-decarbonization. And also, as you can see in the pink part, we are aggressively to produce carbon project by investment to the carbon dioxide removals. So anyway, we take various measures in order to achieve net zero by 2050. Next slide, please. So as Maersk mentioned, the methanol is one of the solutions for the net zero. And we Mitsui O.S.K. is one of the first shipping company who deployed methanol dual fuel engine. Of course, it's the gray methanol, but we deployed our first methanol dual fuel ship in 2016, and currently we have 8 methanol dual fuel tankers already. So methanol engines, we have a lot of experience, and the technologies already proven. So we will increase our methanol dual fuel vessels and also LNG for low carbonization and decarbonization. But as I mentioned, that we also are committed to deploy 130 zero-emission ocean-going vessels by 2035. And the majority will be the ammonia dual fuel vessel. So we are now developing those types of the vessel with our alliance partners. Yes, next slide, please. Yes, and when we succeeded in building the dual fuel vessel. Using ammonia or hydrogen. It is a good chance for us to expand our business domains. Currently, we are, of course, shipping company. Therefore, our main focus is midstream. But it is a good chance for us to expand our business from the upstream to the downstream. And this is exactly the same strategy that we did in the LNG. In LNG, we expanded our business from upstream to downstream. So we will take nearly the same strategy for ammonia and hydrogen. So as you can see in the slide, we are now working for the offshore windmill and CCUS, or even the liquefied CO2 carriers on the upstream side. And also for the midstream side, we are developing the ammonia dual fuel vessel or ammonia FSRU and so on. And for the downstream, we have a chance to develop the ammonia power vessel and so on. Next slide, please. So from now on, I will show you some examples that we are doing in some project. Next slide, please. On the upstream side, we are seriously looking at investment to upstream production project. So we are talking to various partners, and Origin Energy in Australia is one of our partners. And not only in the Australia, but also we are now looking at various projects in the United States and Europe and so on. Next slide, please. So here is the midstream side, and we are developing ammonia dual fuel vessels. The first one will be delivered in 2026. And then we gradually increase our fleet, and by 2035, our zero emission vessel will be over 130. That is our target. Next slide, please. Here is ammonia FSRU. As I said, we have the LNG FSRU already. And taking this experience and the knowledge, we will deploy ammonia FSRU in future. So the FSRU has an advantage because in some countries or some areas, there is some restriction of the land space. But if we can deploy the ammonia FSRU, it will be sorted out. So we will anyway try to expand our business from upstream to downstream. And in order to expand our business, partnership is most important. So now we became the member of some international initiatives, such as Getting to Zero Coalition and Mission Possible Partnership and First Movers Coalition. So the First Movers Coalition, next slide, please. For the First Movers Coalition, we registered in the shipping sector and the carbon dioxide renewable sectors. So we will aggressively, approach to the various partners to achieve net zero by 2050. So that's all my presentation. And I'm very sorry, I have to leave now. So please email me if any questions. So that's all my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tomo. Thank you. How time flies, it comes to end of our webinar. Once again, I sincerely appreciate all the speakers today for preparing these speeches in your busy schedule. And also thanks for coming of our audience. This recording, along with a short recap, will be sent to all registrants this Friday. And comments, please feel free to drop a message at the belong contact. And also, please remember that today's webinar is also the virtual part of our physical event, Connecting Green Hydrogen Japan 2023, which will take place on October 17th to 18th in Tokyo. Please don't hesitate to secure your tickets and join this must-attend event together with C-level decision makers from Malbani Corporate, Air Products, Tokyo Gas, JERA, CAPCO, JPIC, and UNIPER, and much more expect. We also look forward to your participation. Thank you very much. This is all for today's webinar, and we believe that Japan's global action for hydrogen and ammonia value chains will continue to grow in future. See you next time. Bye.